right. Well, good evening, everybody, to another episode of Garden Hour. It's looking like if you missed the weather last night, especially around here in Brookings, we might be getting some storms right now. In fact, I know that Christine is having her specialty crop field day at the moment, and I believe I've just been getting some messages that they're packing up. So in the Brookings area, it's looking a little ominous, but hopefully everybody else is doing all right. But regardless, we're going to talk gardens. We're here for it unless the power goes out. So tonight, I'm going to be your host, Robin Buterbaugh. I'm an extension horticulture field specialist, and joining me as well is Prairey Walkling, our master gardener field specialist. And I'll just say, I guess you can get right into what you're going to talk about, Prairey, since there's only two of us. And um, so there you go.
All right. Thanks, Robin. It's been a while since I've been on Garden Hour, so it's good to be back. And I think everything's working here. So I'll just be providing some summer updates. And as Robin said, I'm Prairey Walkling, Master Gardener Field Specialist. And tonight I'm going to be talking about, we are just wrapping up 2025 training, and we're going to announce our in-person locations for 2026. So you heard it first on Garden Hour. Lucky for you. And we're going to talk about the monthly teaching garden tours that are happening in Sioux Falls a bit. We're going to talk about our 40th anniversary of our Master Gardener program, and I'm going to share a little bit from my garden. So we'll get right into it. All right, so this year we held training in Sioux Falls, Pierre, and Sturgis. This is a photo from Pierre, our smallest group, but a mighty group. We had 82 people trained in home horticulture, and we have 58 new interns that will serve South Dakota communities around the state. So thank you to our instructors for 2025 and to all the trainees. So welcome. In 2026, if you are thinking about becoming a master gardener, or if you have a friend that you think you might want to encourage to join, maybe 2026 is the year. So you choose one. Most classes are online on Thursday evenings, but we do have one or two classes in person, and you choose one location to attend. The one that is based on the date and the location, the one that's most convenient for you. So our locations for 2026 will be Rapid City, yay, Watertown, and Yankton. And so we have clubs in all those locations, and are trying to accommodate, East River, West River, North and South. So we would love to have you join us and become a master gardener. So registration opens in February and March, and then classes start April through June. And this photo is John Ball, the tree guy, who many of you probably know, and he's one of our trainers. And this is at training in Sioux Falls, and he's rescuing a tree that's being damaged by the stakes. And so just a reminder that staking trees can be harmful if done incorrectly or left on for too long. So in this case, it's left on a little too long. And now I'm going to talk about the teaching gardens tours that are happening in Sioux Falls every month. And so we still have August to go, September, October. I put all those dates in there. It's free. It's in the evening. For those of you who may work during the day, you can bring your family if you want. It's 7 to 8 o'clock p.m. And these tours focus primarily on vegetable gardening, and they're led by Jerry Mills, who's a former extension agent turned master gardener, and along with other Minnehaha master gardeners. They're informal tours, and so you get a chance to answer questions. And if you've never been there before, look for this sign, this easel kind of looking thing that will point you in the right direction. And I'd never been there, and I went in June, and it was not that hard to find. So there is a little construction out there, but I encourage you to check it out. In June, I saw peas flowering. I saw, those are strawberries they picked. The asparagus was ferning out. And my favorite part of the tour was the living clover mulch that they use in between the rows. And you could kind of see it in this other picture here. I love that concept, and I'd love to try it at home. And the Arboretum itself is, if you've never been there, Mary Jo Wagner Arboretum is just a nice place to walk around and take a walk too. I explored a couple other trails. So I saw a waterfall. They have kind of some information about East Sioux Falls, which used to be a town, which is interesting. And then they had this passiflora that is what they look like after they bloom. So yeah, encourage you near Sioux Falls or visiting Sioux Falls to check that out. And we are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year of the Master Gardener program. The national program celebrated 50 years in 2023, and it started in Washington, at Washington State University, and that was in response to, they were getting a lot of horticulture questions and a lot of requests for horticulture information. So they decided to train these volunteers, and it's gone, it's really spread from then. It's in every state. It's in some Canadian provinces, South Korea. So it's been a very successful organization. And in South Dakota, we started about in 1985 was our first class, and how it got started. And you can see in the photo here, our founders are these four gentlemen, the Reverend Bill Fouts and Dick Fadgen, both of Huron, and then seated are Bob Scher of Watertown and Dean Martin of Brookings. And Fadgen and Scher went to a seminar in Minnesota and heard about the program, and then they were talking to Dean Martin about it. And then meanwhile, Reverend Fouts was a trained master gardener from Maryland, and he moved to Huron and started talking to Dick Fadgen, who was his local extension agent. And so they put the first class together in 1985, and here we are celebrating our 40th anniversary, and we'll celebrate that in Pierre in September. And then also at the state fair, we'll have a display at the Mirror Room. So we always have a booth at the state fair. So if you're coming through the Horticulture Building, stop by and see us and check out the Mirror Room. And we just want to say thank you to these four founders and many others through the years who have served this program in many ways. So these are 4 bur oaks that are planted at the fairgrounds in honor of the 4 founders. And that bench that they were sitting on in the previous photo, that's also at the fairgrounds to honor them. So just a word about that. And then now I will move on to my garden. And this year, so kind of a mishmash of things, but this year I wanted to plant Monarda, bee balm, wild bergamot at my house. I love the way it smells. It's pretty. It attracts pollinators. Some people say it looks like a plant with a bad haircut, which I think is funny. So there are 2 natives, Monarda to South Dakota. This is the most common species you'll see, Monarda fistulosa, and this was just a few weeks ago in Custer State Park. And you can see that it is widely distributed throughout the US from this map. So I went to my local greenhouse and I found these two options, and they're both part of the Sugar Buzz series. So they've been bred to be smaller and more contained than the wild version. That Monarda fistulosa can grow 2 to 4 feet tall, while these stay under 2 feet tall, about 20 inches or so, kind of medium height in your garden. And so far, I prefer the Rockin' Raspberry because it's had a lot more blooms, and they are in the same raised bed under the same conditions. But I hope they both come back next year. And so, there's that factor to consider too. There are 8 colors in this series. These were the only 2 that I saw, but there are a lot more colors. And they mildew can be an issue for Monarda, and they have above average mildew resistance. So these are just some to consider. There's also like these scarlet or red Monarda. This is Jacob Klein, which is said to do well in Minnesota and attracts hummingbirds. So that would be a fun one to try if you've tried that one. Love to hear about that. And then another, and this is some more established Monarda at the Outdoor Campus West in Rapid City. And I said it's kind of like, this is in it's kind of towards the front, kind of the business in the front, the landscaping version. And you can see it's a pretty big shrub. I imagine this one is a few years old at least. And I hope you can see this, but I think that this one to the left is maybe something similar to my Rockin' Raspberry. It's kind of a darker color and it's kind of smaller. And then maybe the larger one is the native, but they weren't labeled, so I'm not sure about that. And then in the back of Outdoor Campus, if you walk back on the trails, you can see more wild. It's mixed in with false sunflower and lots of other plants, and it's a lot. It's pretty tall. I would say like 3-4 feet tall. So you can see 2 different versions there. That's a great place for a walk. And then another place you can see some Monarda is the Pelican Lake Recreation Area, which is near Watertown. And these photos were taken by Diane Ryder, who's a Coteau Prairey Master Gardener, in their pollinator plot. And she felt like this was full bloom. And this was just a few days ago, I think. So you can see, it's just beautiful. So if that's something that you'd like to see, go take a trip to Pelican Lake Recreation Area. A few other things that this is something I had never grown before. It's called Abutilon. I had to put the pronunciation because I wasn't sure. It's or tiger eye, some call it. It's a flowering maple. It's not a maple, but it kind of has maple-like foliage. It's actually in the mallow family, so related to hibiscus, and you can kind of see that in the flower. It's a shrub in very warm places, and not here. Mine's in a container. It is not a prolific bloomer, I wouldn't say. It hasn't bloomed that much, but it is unique. The flowers kind of hang down on it. You can put it in full sun or part shade. It's not real drought tolerant, and you could try to overwinter it. So that was just kind of a interesting plant that I tried this year. Also tried balloon flower this year, and I bet some of you have this already in your gardens, but the variety I tried was Sentimental Blue, and I'm kind of blown away by this plant. It's not in the greatest soil and it looks really healthy and it's been blooming. You do need to deadhead it, but it has these unique, the buds puff up like that, and then they kind of unfold into a star shape. And McCrory Gardens said that the buds can pop when you squeeze them, but be gentle. I haven't tried that, but that sounds like fun. And it's a perennial to zone 3. So I hope it comes back. And yeah, and there are other colors available too. So I have been pretty impressed with this plant. And here is McCrory Gardens just posted this today, their balloon flower, and look at that. I don't know what I should ask Sydney or about what variety this is, but I really like that one too. And a quick story on was on my balloon flower, is that I have never seen these before, but I saw them this year. And we have got quite a bit of rain. They're called horsehair or Gordian worms. And I saw them in late June, and then I saw them a second time in the same general area. And it was after a rain. And I didn't really want to touch it. I wasn't sure what it was. So I was trying to figure out what it was. But it's harmless to people, pets, and plants, and can be considered beneficial. You don't really need to do any control or anything, but my coworker, Patrick, is entomology field specialist in Rapid City, said his family had a pool and they would have crickets sometimes would get in the pool, and these worms would come out of the crickets, and sounds gross, probably was gross. So just kind of a curious creature that I saw this year. Maybe it's something, and a friend of mine said she's seen them before too, so can become kind of a nuisance. All right, what's next? Oh, chenille plant. So this one, I think it's kind of a matter of taste. My husband thinks these are ugly, kind of like pink worms is kind of how he described them. But I thought I think it's kind of fun. I wanted to try it kind of as my spiller in my container. And so that's my container in the bottom container. And then that's another container that was done at Botanic Gardens in Wisconsin. So these flowers are said to resemble chenille yarn. This is hardy to zone 10, so this is an annual in our climate, unless you're going to try to overwinter it in a greenhouse or something like that. But it can get to be a large shrub in tropical locations. And it's, yeah, I don't know, I kind of liked it. So something different to try. And in my vegetable garden, I feel like I'm kind of behind, but harvesting choke cherries and beans, and eagerly my first cucumber today, and eagerly awaiting tomatoes and all that. And then another thing I'm doing this year is the North Dakota Home Garden Variety Trials. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that. And these are organized by Tom Kalb, who's a PhD from SDSU Extension. And they say the first step to growing a great garden is to sow great varieties. So through this trial, they are choosing the varieties for you and asking you to test them in your garden. And they also do some herbs and cut flowers too. And they welcome surrounding states and provinces to participate. So that's how I'm participating. You can participate in up to 8 trials. It costs about $1.50 for each seed trial. And what you're agreeing to is to grow the seeds of both varieties and compare them, evaluate those varieties, and submit your results promptly. So I created this diagram. I'm just doing 3 trials, and they do give you plant tags to put in, but I was just worried that they might get lost. So I made this diagram so I could remember what I planted or what I planted where. So I'm doing, my son thought we should do dwarf double petal sunflowers. So I'm comparing baby bear and teddy bear, and I've never grown these before. And I know they're not as tall as some of the other sunflowers, 3 feet, so, and I haven't got any blooms yet, but I think they'll be coming soon. So doing those, and then flaming zinnias, these are just starting to bloom. I'm comparing lava lamp and south of the border, and then pickling organic cucumbers, double yield and provision. And they are blooming and growing on the trellis, but I haven't quite got cucumbers yet. We planted this was early June. So, so the way that they select their varieties is they're looking for early maturity, flavorful, disease resistant, productive, and then widely adapted to soil and weather conditions. And then at the end of the trial, you fill out, which I think it's really quite doable. You fill this out, and you're saying, when did you plant them? Did you use fertilizer? Did you use pesticides? Which germinated first? And some other questions there that you can see. You're going to rate them, each variety, give your preference, and then explain, I guess, your reason for your preference. So, and then, so some master gardeners have done these trials as well. So that's kind of where I got the idea. Joanne Donley, who's a Prairie Partners master gardener, grew pumpkins and winter squash through this, and she donated over 400 pounds of winter squash and 600 pounds of pumpkin in 2024. And you can see some of those that she grew there. And she said the best part is that they taste delicious, and she'd never heard of these varieties before, but they're now her favorite squash. So it's a fun way to learn about some new varieties. And I think, well, if they grow in North Dakota, they should grow well here, usually. And this was a quote from a participant that the program became a tradition that they do every summer, and they let their kids choose the seeds, which I kind of did with the sunflowers, and that they're so glad they're learning gardening skills that they can take with them. So if you're interested in that for 2026, you can check that out. And then they, of course, publish their results. So they do a summary of the results, and they share how many people trialed these beans, what was their rating, and then they come up with these vegetable cultivars that they are suggesting for our area. And this is, I think, my last slide, that I recently visited the San Diego Botanic Garden, and this was one of my favorite parts. These are life-size succulent topiaries, and they were originally created by Pat Hammer for the Philadelphia Flower Show in 2003. And back then they were planted with ivy. And when Pat joined the staff at San Diego Botanic Garden, she brought her topiaries along, and she chose to redo them in succulents as they work well in San Diego's dry climate. And today they are maintained by volunteers. And the aloe on the dress is, there's 8 of them, and they're mariachi musicians and dancers. And the aloe on the dress is meant to kind of look like a bow, which, and I don't know, I just loved them. So if you ever make it out there, that's fun to see. And I am in Rapid City. If you have questions about the Master Gardener program, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. There is my email address and my phone number. And yeah, I don't know if there were any questions or anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Prairie. That was really cool. I loved seeing all of your garden pictures, and the Monarda, of course, is a really fun native plant. I mean, the bees do love it. That's which is kind of why they call it bee balm. We do have a couple questions about the Monarda, and so I can just answer those. I did forget to mention at the very beginning, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And also, we might have some people saying where they're at in the chat, but yeah, questions can go in the Q&A. So the first question is from Ginny, and she said that she's got a lot of aster yellow problems in my yard, unfortunately, and lost most of my plants. Is bee balm a plant I could replace my other ones with or not? And so you could you could plant bee balm in your yard, but I wouldn't necessarily plant it right where your other plants that were affected were, because bee balm is also affected. And it's really kind of amazing how many different types of plants do get aster's yellow. So yeah, I probably wouldn't replant it in the same area. But maybe try some of these other varieties, or look for a variety. I don't know if there's specifically varieties that are more disease resistant, but you could look for some of those that, similar to what you had found, Prairie, some of those different cultivars. And then the other question about Monarda is, are we to deadhead Monarda? And so the answer to that is certainly deadheading Monarda really extends the life of those blooms. It can kind of make your whole plant look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. If you're interested in keeping some of those flowers and seed heads on later in the season, like for winter, there are a lot of birds that will eat the seeds of native plants. So that's an option, but certainly as far as earlier in the season and midsummer, you can deadhead the Monarda, and that will kind of keep it looking fresh. So
Do you use a pruner to do that?
probably a little pruner or a scissors. And if you're doing that, I probably would clean it pretty well between different types of plants, just because then maybe you won't be spreading any disease like that. Which do as I say, not as I do, because I thinking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I've been using the same pruner for lots of things. But yeah.
I didn't know that about aster yellows, so that's good to know too.
Yeah. So, and the variety trials sound awesome. Like, that's really cool. It makes it a little bit more fun when you can put some of that, extra, do it a little bit differently and do it like an experiment. It kind of makes it fun.
Yeah, and there are a lot to choose from. Like not just what I did, or not just pumpkins. There's a lot of options with the trials. So you can check them out online.
Okay, cool. We did have another question that is not related to Monarda, from Karen, and it is, what causes zucchini plant flowers to set fruit and then dry up? So that could be a number of things, really. There could be, like, if it's not pollinated completely, like if it's just partially pollinated or not enough, then it can maybe start to produce fruit, but then it just doesn't have enough to keep going. There's horse squash vine borer is another one, where if you start to see your small little zucchini or summer squash growing and then the ends kind of die, then that could be squash vine borers, and you'd want to check the base of your plants for that to make sure that you don't see some of that like sawdust looking material at the very base, which would be an indication that the squash vine borer, like moth, has laid an egg, and then you're going to have a really gross grub in there. You can very carefully, like surgically kind of split the base and sometimes dig that little grub or larva out and kill it, and then bury the stem in soil. So you can kind of sometimes save them that way. And there are a couple other diseases and fungal diseases that can cause that as well. And if you do have any issues, feel free to take pictures and send them in, because we could also send those pictures or even a sample to the plant diagnostic lab to check for some of those other diseases if it's not like a squash vine borer. All right, let's see, what other questions did we have? I think that's it for the moment. I'll check the chat here. And so just somebody introducing themselves to you, Prairey. Vicky. So, all right. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about pollinators as well for some of the time that we've got left here. So, thank you, Prairey, so much for sharing your garden trials and all of the cool Master Gardener information. We really appreciate that. And I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can talk a little bit about plants and pollinators. All right. So I actually had a lot of fun the other day giving this presentation to the Boys and Girls Club here in Brookings. So, it's a little bit more interactive, but I think for tonight we will just kind of, if you want to answer some of the questions that I'm going to pose in the chat, feel free. I'll try to check on the chat a little bit. But I thought that some of the information on here was just stuff that I didn't even know before and learned, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. So hopefully you all will agree. So first off, if you haven't already gotten clues from the first two slides, I would welcome if anybody has some ideas for some of the other pollinators that you might see around on your plants. Anybody got any ideas for additional pollinators besides bees? All right, well, if not, I'll kind of keep moving here. Some of these you might already have thought of, and some of them maybe not. First, of course, we've got our bees, we've got our butterflies. But also flies can be pollinators, and that was kind of a new one for me when I first started doing a little bit more research into native plants and pollinators. Hummingbirds, of course, are good pollinators, but even ants and beetles are also pollinators. So I think it's just kind of cool to think about outside the box when it comes to pollinators. And then kind of what I'll go into here is the different types of flowers and the different kind of indications that flowers give to their pollinators. So it's kind of this relationship between plants and their pollinators that I think is kind of really cool to think about. So what do pollinators need? Well, of course, like all living things, they need habitat. So they need a place to live and a place to find food. That food usually consists of nectar, which is more the carbohydrates and sugar component. And then for bees, often they will also collect pollen as a protein, fat, and vitamins for bringing back to the hives to feed their baby bees. So both nectar and pollen are resources used by pollinators. And sometimes, as in this picture, sometimes they just need a cozy place to take a nap. This was a picture that I took on a plant walk that I went on a couple years ago. And I think it's the first time that I saw a bee sleeping in a flower. But for all of you gardeners out there, maybe that's something that you are more familiar with. But for the first time that I saw it, I was like, wow, I can't believe that the bee is just taking a nap in the flower. So plants actually have different ways to communicate with the various pollinators, and certain plants are more attractive or are pollinated by different types of pollinators. So some of those flower traits include the color of the flower. For example, bees and wasps really like white, yellow colors, and sometimes they'll see some of those ultraviolet colors that we can't see with the human eye. Butterflies like more bright reds and purples. Some other traits that flowers have are nectar guides. So if you are familiar with just the visual look of the center of the flowers, often there'll be little kind of symbols or nectar guides that are present. Sometimes they're not visible to us, that are indications to different pollinators to come and pollinate the plant. odor is one. So sometimes, especially as I'll talk about a little bit later, like the night blooming flowers for moth, scent is really important. And then if you kind of look over here on the right, I don't know that many of us want to attract filth flies to the garden with putrid smelling flowers, but that is a thing. So just to kind of be aware of that. And then of course the nectar and the pollen are drawing in these pollinators, and then even the shape of the flower can be an indication to different pollinators. So for example, flower syndromes are what is actually called the language between flowers and pollinators. And so I think it's just really cool to think about the fact that some of these flowers have evolved with different pollinators, and that the whole way that they look is just to kind of, enhance that relationship between those two creatures. So for example, hummingbirds like red tubular flowers, like Eastern Columbine is there on the left, and then that red bee balm, kind of similar to what Prairey was talking about. So hummingbirds are one that you can attract to your garden with some of these different flower types. And on the right here are some examples of those tubular flowers that might have a bad smell, that mimic rotting meat to draw in flies. And so the flies don't necessarily think they're coming to a flower. They think they're just coming to something dead, but they're unintentionally pollinating these flowers. So example, like skunk cabbage, corpse flower. This one on the left is a different, a type of an orchid. So that's the kind of things that the flies like that are pollinating those plants. Of course, moths at night, they like tubular, light-colored flowers that are highly scented, just because obviously when it's dark, they need a good indication of where to go find the nectar that they need. And it's interesting that how far away they can smell or sense the scent of these different flowers. I think it's, hundreds of feet away that they can detect those scents. So that's kind of cool. And then bees are more generalist usually. We have some different specialist bees, especially our native bees. Honeybees are fairly general. They like to go to all kinds of different flowers. But interestingly enough, they also like to solve puzzles. So some of these flowers like lupine or the bottle gentian really kind of pose a challenge, and only certain types of bees maybe can get into them. For example, like bumblebees with the bottle gentian. So they really like to try to like wedge themselves in there and figure out these little kind of mazes or puzzles. As I mentioned, bumblebees like tubular flowers. This was this was a really fun picture. I actually stumbled upon quite a few different pictures of bumblebee butts sticking out of flowers, which I think is adorable. So this is actually a flower that was submitted as one of the photo contest flowers for the Native Plant Initiative. So I thought I'd better include that as well. Um, Interestingly enough, magnolia trees are so ancient, probably about 100 million years old, that they are not pollinated by bees, butterflies, or moths because they actually didn't even exist yet. So magnolia trees are pollinated by beetles, which is kind of a fun fact. And as far as color goes, different pollinators see colors better than others. So birds actually have an extra photoreceptor that allows them to see red, but bees don't. And so red flowers to bees just look like a shadow, or they look dark. So I didn't even know this until I was doing some research for this, but the red colored native plants are usually always kind of pollinated by birds, especially hummingbirds. Not to say that they can't be pollinated by butterflies too, but the adaptation and evolution of those has been to attract birds because of that extra photoreceptor. But for bees, they can see yellow really, really well. And so that's why you'll often see lots and lots of bees on your sunflowers and some black-eyed Susans and other flowers like that. So interestingly, the nectar guides are kind of like when you're coming into an airport and you see all of the lights on and kind of just guiding in the plane to exactly where it needs to go. And that is what these nectar guides do. They're markings, lines, or patterns on flowers that direct pollinators like bees straight to the nectar. And then, as a kind of side benefit, then they're also pollinating the plants. So here's a couple examples of that. This flower on the left is a Rocky Mountain iris or a blue flag iris, and you can see those lines on the petals of the plants just directing them right in. And same here on the right with just the marigold. It's kind of, it is dark, like a red color, so maybe you would think that bees don't necessarily notice that as much, but it is still an indication and a difference from the petal that tells them where they need to go. And just here's just kind of a rhetorical question, but do you know why some bees buzz? Um, and this I think is a cool flower. I know it's kind of considered more of a weedy flower here, but I do still like it. It's called shooting star or the Dodecatheon media. And so a lot of times you'll see these kind of pendulous flowers and the bees are just hanging upside down off of them. So in a lot of these situations, the bees are buzzing to kind of help the pollen kind of fall down and stick to them. And another interesting fact that I learned is a lot of times flowers will have kind of an electric field or an electrostatic charge, so that when they have nectar available, they will have a positive charge, and then the bees are negatively charged. So as the bee flies close, it can sense that, and then the pollen will actually like almost jump over to the bee, kind of like when you have a static charge and you get stuff clinging to you. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. And so after that flower has been pollinated or the nectar has been drank by the bee, then that charge has gone away, and it takes a little bit of time for the nectar to build up and for that charge to build up again. And then that's an indication to another bee sometime in the future that there's nectar available again. So here's a picture of an aster, and there is a little butterfly on there, but I just kind of want to point out that there is a difference between some of these flowers, even though they're all asters. I'll just give you a second to kind of look at them and see if you can figure it out. But some of these asters have more of a red center, and some of them have more of the yellow center, and that is an indication of whether or not they've been pollinated or not. So the bees that have visited the asters, those center portions will actually turn red. And if you could recall, because bees don't see red as well, that's an indication that that is more of a shadow, and they're not going to be drawn to those flowers anymore, because it really doesn't benefit the bees or the flowers to spend time on a flower that doesn't have any nectar or doesn't need to be pollinated anymore. So that's just a really cool way that the flowers are communicating to the bees, like, oh, no, nothing to see here. You can move on to the next one that still has that bright yellow center and should still be pollinated yet. So I think that's kind of cool. Here is an example on the white clover. You can see that the white clover on the left is a little bit different than the little white clover over here on the right. And, you know, I've seen this for many years and never really thought much about it. But the white clover on the left here, these little flower petals that are still upright have not been pollinated, but the ones that have been pollinated, you can see are a little bit more of that reddish brown look, and they're drooping down now, so they're not as accessible to the bees. So the flowers actually, once they've been pollinated, move those petals down, and so they're not accessible anymore, whereas the one on the right still has most of them that need to be pollinated. And then this is a picture of a northern catalpa tree. And again, there is an indication here, if you look closely, those flowers here with the yellowish orange nectar guides, and this is also a really, really great example of a nectar guide, are still yellow, but the ones that have been pollinated have turned to this more reddish orange look. So I think that's also just really fascinating. So based on all of these flower syndromes and this language that the flowers have to communicate with their pollinators, what do you think happens when we change the color or shape of a flower? For example, cone flowers. I'm sure that you've seen at the greenhouse and the nurseries that there's all kinds of different varieties of cone flowers. In fact, there's more than 100 cultivars of purple cone flower. Well, in some cases, it's not really that big of a deal. But In other cases, depending on what the color is or whether it's a double bloom, it can actually affect whether or not pollinators can utilize those plants for pollen and nectar. For example, green jewel, the echinacea right here on the top right, is much less visible to pollinators just because of that color. Whereas on the bottom right, this Magnus is more densely flowered, but otherwise not really that much different from the straight species. So if there's not a lot of changes in color or in arrangement of the petals, then usually those are still okay for pollinators. But this one on the left, Pink Double Delight, is actually a sterile cultivar, so it doesn't produce any pollen, and the nectar is inaccessible. So that is beautiful in the garden, but also not as beneficial for the pollinators. Not to say that we can't plant some of these different cultivars in our yard, of course, like Prairey mentioned. Some of them have better disease resistance, or some of them get a little or stay a little bit shorter, so they're not as floppy. Maybe don't get as much powdery mildew, but it is kind of a trade-off you have to think about as far as what your goal is. So, of course, have plenty of plants that are there just because you love the look of them, but make sure to have also plants for pollinators as well, so they still have the resources that they need. And so I'll put in a little plug, of course, because I talk about native plants a lot, that native plants are especially suitable for pollinators in our region because those pollinators and the flowers have kind of evolved together to have these relationships. And so they are an important part of our landscape. They help the soil. They are helpful for biodiversity. They can prevent erosion. They need less watering and maintenance. So there's a lot of benefits to native plants besides just the benefits that they have to pollinators. For example, a lot of our native plants have really deep root systems, and so that can really help with the soil stability and erosion. And of course, some of our native plants have specialist insects or pollinators that they require. For example, milkweed is the monarch's host plant. So they can't go through their life cycle without laying their eggs and having the caterpillars feed on milkweed leaves. So that means that monarch caterpillars can only eat milkweed. They can't lay their eggs on any other type of plant and have them survive. But you do see monarch butterflies pollinating and drinking nectar from many different flowers. So they, as a butterfly, can utilize a lot of different floral resources, but they do need the milkweed in order to raise those eggs and the caterpillars. So a couple tips for pollinator gardens here quick. If you're choosing plants, make sure that you choose a variety of plants with a lot of different pollen and nectar. I say avoid cultivars, but if there's cultivars that you really, really love and you want to see, of course, you can keep those in your garden, but just make sure that you have plenty of other plants that are going to be beneficial for pollinators. Make sure that you have some of those host plants for butterflies like milkweed. There are some varieties of milkweed that work better in smaller gardens, like swamp milkweed works pretty well, and the butterfly milkweed stay a little bit more contained than some of the other more aggressive milkweeds like the common milkweed and world milkweed. Planting a variety of flowers for blooms throughout the whole season and different flower shapes, so some of those tubular flowers for the bumblebees, some of the things like asters or the purple flowers for butterflies are all good choices. And then be okay with some pest damage. That picture on the left, which I think is really cool, it's an ash leaf, but those circles are just so perfect. And that is a leaf cutter bee that has just been cutting those circles out of the leaves and using it to make a nest or a place to lay their eggs. So a few more tips about shelter. It's good to have different layers in your garden, not only just for aesthetic purposes, but also to provide protection from the weather for the different pollinators. Leaving some dead branches in your garden at the end of the season. So don't trim them all the way down to the ground. Leave about 6 to 12 inches of some of those hollow stems and leaves for shelter and nesting sites for moths and butterflies and bees throughout the winter. A lot of our native bees are actually nesting in the soil, so leaving some areas of soil uncovered for those ground nesting bees is important. And then also grouping plants together so pollinators can move safely among plants and don't have to expend as much energy. So, having groups of 3 to 4 or 5 plants together so that once they have that beacon of plant that draws them in, they don't have to travel too far to get to those other plants in that grouping. So, and I just want to really encourage people, learning about these different flower communication symbols from the flowers and the pollinators was really cool. I thought it was awesome. And I just want to encourage people to look around and notice that there's a lot more going around in the world than we realize. Like, I didn't really even look closely enough to notice that some of those centers of those flowers were yellow versus red, or that those nectar guides had changed colors. So if you look around, you'll see some fascinating things that, you might not otherwise have noticed. And I just wanted to leave you with a couple more slides with some pictures of some of our pollinators. I know this picture on the right here is a bumblebee on a lead plant, and you can see that on some of these flower petals, they're still full of pollen, whereas that one over on the left has already had all the pollen kind of probably taken by the different bumblebees. This picture on the very left is a really cool one. It's butterfly milkweed with a spice bush swallowtail butterfly. And so I wanted to leave everybody with the fun pollinator pictures, but I also want to draw your attention to the fact that this weekend, it's our 60th anniversary for McCrory Gardens. There's going to be the garden party is on Friday night, August 1st. There'll be SDSU ice cream and music. And then on August 2nd, we're going to be having the garden expo. So there'll be some tours, a photo contest, and some other activities going on for that. Another thing that isn't necessarily garden specifically related, unless you're in the Sioux Falls area and have a lot of extra produce, there's going to be a Food Rescue 605 cleaning and production day. So if you do live in the Sioux Falls area and have extra garden produce, I would encourage you to visit this website and potentially be able to donate your produce to this project. And then just for fun, I'm going to leave you, as Prairey was talking about the chenille plant, I remembered that I had a picture of my kids from quite a few years ago. They probably would hate me if they saw that I had put this picture on the slide presentation. But anyway, this is us in the nursery with chenille plant mustaches on my two boys. So anyway, I just thought I had to add that in there. So anyway, there's my contact information. I'm I have been out in the Sioux Falls Regional Center, but now I'm up in McCrory Gardens full time, but I'm still in the Sioux Falls area a lot. So if you have gardens or garden questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help as well as I can. So let's see in the chat. If you've got any more questions about pollinators, I know I'm not Amanda, I'm not an entomologist, so I can't necessarily answer the insect questions per se, but I can maybe answer some of the plant questions as they're related to pollinators.
Yeah, I was looking at questions too, but
Yep.
I'm not sure I see any. I
Yeah.
thought that was so interesting though, how the the asters, how the center of the flower changes color, and the clover.
I
I'm
know.
gonna have to look for that. That's so cool.
Yep. Yeah, it's just amazing when I will mention if people are interested in this sort of thing, I learned a lot about it from Rebecca McMacken. She is what she names herself as an ecological horticulturalist, which is kind of what I kind of feel that I am as well with my kind of interest in native plants and with ecological design. So she talks a lot. She's given some TED Talks. And so she talked about these pollinator plant communication and the flower syndromes. And when I first heard her talking, I was like, this is amazing. I have to learn more about it. So that's kind of how I kind of moved into learning a little bit more about this area. Yeah. It's amazing what's out there that there's a whole world out there. There's all of these pollinators, there's all of these insects, there's all of these plants, like there's all of these things happening all of the time. And um, yeah, just pay attention and you can uh, see a lot of things.
I have an anise hyssop that I got from the Native Plant Initiative. And the first year was kind of small. And then this year it's probably 5 foot tall,
Yeah.
maybe, maybe even taller than that. And I just saw my first bee on it because I know it's
Oh,
supposed
nice.
to attract pollinators, but maybe it just takes them a while to find it. Do you think
Yeah.
that's that could
Yeah, it could be.
happen?
My anise hyssop is barely starting to bloom, and I don't even know. We have a lot of bee balm blooming here at McCrory, and we were out actually the other night for the tea workshop. We went out and picked some of the Monarda, the bee balm, and there were a lot of bees on it. So I think it's probably just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm also just trying to type in the chat here about that information about Rebecca McMackets.
And I do see a question
Okay.
from Leanne soon. When your common milkweed goes to seed, should you cut them back to get new growth?
I don't know that common milkweed, it grows on that central stalk. And so really you could cut the seed head off if you don't want it necessarily like floating away and spreading everywhere. You won't necessarily get a lot of new growth if it's later in the season, but you could. I have seen people recommend cutting back milkweed a little bit just because the monarchs like to lay their eggs on the newest flowers because they're more tender. So it wouldn't necessarily have to do with them going to seed per se, but if you wanted to throughout the season cut them back a little bit just to encourage some new growth, you could do that.
And then I saw someone Mary, another master gardener, raise her hand. Do we how do we handle that?
Let's see. I think they would just unmute and ask the question if they wanted to have a question. Otherwise, if they wanted to type it into the Q&A box.
Okay. And I think I inadvertently raised my hand. So
Oh, okay.
it could have that could have been it too.
Okay, maybe she said it was a mistake. So no problem. Zoom, even though we've been doing Zoom for many years, it is still, you just never know what might happen with technology. You might be waving your hand over a keyboard and something happens. So
Michael Card, did you raise your hand? Do you have a question?
no, I think he just said thanks for sharing. So
Okay.
all right. Well, we're happy that you all could join us, even on this kind of somewhat stormy night. I don't think it's been too bad here in Brookings. There's been a few different like thunder claps and some little bit of rain, but doesn't look like anything's blowing away too much. So that's good. Hopefully those of you in the other parts of the state who have had bad weather are faring okay and cleanup is going well. And yeah, severe weather is never great. So we feel for everybody who's dealing with that at any point. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Prairey, for sharing as well. And we will see you all next week for Garden Hour again.
Thanks,
I
Robin.
won't be there, but somebody else will be. So, all right. Thank you.
Good night.